He signed the papers without reading them. My brother-in-law, Marcus, slid the transfer agreement across the kitchen table with the same casual confidence he used for everything, the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no. He was already scrolling through his phone before the pen even touched the paper. "Just the formality," he said. "You know how lawyers are. Sign where the tabs are." My husband, Ethan, nodded at me. "Sign it." I signed it. That was 3 years ago. I was 26, newly married, and had just agreed to transfer my half of my late father's property portfolio into a joint family trust. One that, I would later discover, had a clause buried on page 11 that gave Marcus, as the eldest son, final authority over all asset decisions. I did not read page 11. I thought I was joining a family. I did not realize I was signing an employment contract with no exit clause. It started the way these things always start, with something small. The first winter after the trust was formed, the furnace in the rental property on Elgin Street broke down in January. Ottawa in January is not a suggestion, it is a sentence. The tenants called Marcus. Marcus called Ethan. Ethan called me at work. "We need to cover the repair," he said. "Marcus says the trust account is tied up in the renewal paperwork for the commercial unit." I paid the $2,800 out of my personal account. Marcus said he would reimburse me by the end of the month. The end of that month came and went. I stopped counting after month 4. That was how it worked. When something needed paying, I paid it. When something generated income, Marcus managed it. He had a way of making these two facts feel unrelated, like they existed in separate universes that just happened to share a mailing address. He was charming about it. That was the thing people never understood when I tried to explain it later. Marcus was not a villain in the way villains look in movies. He did not sneer. He did not threaten. He smiled. He topped up your wine glass. He told stories at dinner that made everyone laugh until they cried. And in the morning you would find yourself agreeing to things you had no memory of deciding. His wife, Diane, was worse in a quieter way. She had a talent for making you feel ungrateful for things that had been taken from you. When I mentioned, once, that I had not seen any of the income from the Elgin Street property in 6 months, she looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "But Marcus handles all of that. Are you saying you don't trust your own family?" I stopped mentioning it after that. My husband was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that because the story is complicated in the way real things are complicated, and reducing Ethan to a villain flattened something that was genuinely painful. He had grown up in Marcus's shadow. He had learned, over 30-something years, that the path of least resistance around his brother was to agree first and process later. He did not see the pattern because he had been inside it his entire life. The water does not notice it is wet, but I noticed. I had come from outside. I had a reference point, and the longer I lived inside that house, the more I understood what my father had tried to tell me the last time I saw him alive. "The Calloway family collects people," he had said. He was in the hospital by then, 2 weeks before the end, and I had assumed it was the medication talking. They collect people the way other people collect assets. Be careful what you let them put your name on. I had squeezed his hand and told him he was tired and should sleep. I wish every day that I had asked him what he meant. The call came on a Tuesday in March. Ethan and I had been living in Marcus's house for 8 months. By then a temporary arrangement that had stretched from 6 weeks into the better part of a year while we waited for the trust to release funds for our own place. I was working remotely, doing financial compliance work for a mid-size firm in Toronto, and I had converted the spare room into a home office. It was the one space in that house that felt like mine. I was in the middle of a review, when Marcus knocked once, and opened the door without waiting. "We need to talk about the Brockville property," he said. The Brockville property was a storage facility my father had owned for nearly 20 years, a commercial unit about 90 minutes east of Ottawa, on a stretch of highway that had never been pretty, but had always been profitable. My father had rented it to a rotating cast of small businesses, a plumbing contractor, a restoration company, a guy who flipped furniture. The building was old and unglamorous, and the roof had been patched 3 times, but it paid its own way every single month without asking for anything. Marcus sat down in the chair across from me without being invited. He had a folder in his hand. "I've been in talks with a developer," he said. "He wants the Brockville site for a logistics hub. We're looking at $380,000 for the land." I set down my pen. My father had purchased that property in 2003 for $85,000. In 20 years, it had paid back that investment many times over. "What's the current annual income from the facility?" I asked. Marcus waved his hand. "It's inconsistent. Tenants come and go. Last year, it cleared $34,000 net." He looked at me the way he always looked at me when I cited numbers like I had just sneezed at the dinner table. Technically something that happened, but not worth acknowledging. "The roof needs a full replacement," he said. "We're looking at $60,000 minimum. The developer's offer makes the math simple. The math is $380,000 once, versus $34,000 every year indefinitely. That's not simple, Marcus. That's a bad trade. He smiled. He had very white teeth, and he used them the way other men use their height. I appreciate your perspective, he said. I'll factor it in. He stood up and closed the folder. The trust agreement gives me final authority on asset decisions. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a heads up. He left. I sat there and looked at the wall for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and reread page 11. 2 weeks later, Ethan came to bed after midnight, which was unusual. He sat on the edge of the mattress with his back to me. And I could tell from the particular quality of his silence that something had already been decided. Marcus is moving forward with the sale, he said. I know. He paused. He thinks it makes sense for us to find our own place. With the sale proceeds, the trust can distribute a portion, and we can use that as a down payment. I sat up. How much of a portion? He's talking about $40,000. I did the math in my head. Our combined share of the trust should have entitled us to significantly more than that. And the rest? He wants to reinvest it. Commercial real estate in Canada. He says the returns will benefit everyone in the long run. Or benefit Marcus in the short run. Ethan turned to look at me. His face had the expression I had come to dread. Not anger, not agreement, but a kind of exhausted neutrality that meant the conversation was already over, even as it was happening. His family, he said. Swanee. He didn't have an answer for that. He turned off the lamp and we lay in the dark and I stared at the ceiling and thought about my father's voice in the hospital room. The Calloway family collects people. I understood it now. I understood it the way you understand a diagnosis, not as news, exactly, but as the name for something you have been living with for a long time without having the language for it. I was not a wife. I was not a partner. I was a managed asset with a signature on file. My value to this household was my compliance, and my paycheck, and my willingness to keep quiet when the numbers didn't add up. And I had been very, very willing. That ended that night. Not loudly, not with a scene or a speech or a confrontation. I didn't wake Ethan. I didn't send a message. I just lay there in the dark, and made a decision the way you make the important ones quietly, completely, and without any drama at all. I was going to go to Brockville. I drove out on a Saturday in early April, before the developer's survey team was scheduled to arrive. The highway east of Ottawa was flat and gray, and the fields on either side still held patches of dirty snow. I had told Ethan I was visiting a friend. He hadn't asked which one. The property was on a county road about 3 kilometers off the main highway, set back from the road behind a gravel lot. I had not been here since my father's funeral, and in the intervening years I had thought of it only as a line item, a number on a trust statement that showed up quarterly and meant the roof had held. I parked in the lot and sat in the car for a moment. The building was larger than I remembered. A long, low commercial structure with a corrugated metal roof, painted once in a shade of green that had faded to the color of old sage. The current tenant sign, a waterproofing company out of Smiths Falls, had a padlock on the side entrance. A second unit at the far end appeared unoccupied, the roll-up door secured with a chain and a heavy disc lock. I had the master keys. My father had given them to me years ago, before the trust, in a small envelope with my name written on it in his careful handwriting. I had carried them in my bag ever since, without fully understanding why, the way you carry certain things out of instinct before you understand their purpose. I let myself into the vacant unit. It was cold. The kind of cold that lives in unheated spaces in early spring, not brutal, but patient, like it had been waiting. I turned on my phone flashlight and walked the perimeter. Old shelving units along one wall, some industrial cable reel, a push broom with a broken handle. Dust on everything. Then I noticed the electrical panel. It was mounted on the back wall beside the utility sink, a standard commercial panel. Nothing unusual. I opened it out of habit. I'd been reviewing property maintenance records for weeks, and had developed a checklist mentality. I was looking for anything that might affect the building's value assessment, any deferred maintenance the developer could use to knock down the offer price. The panel was clean. Newer than the rest of the building, actually, recently upgraded, based on the breaker model. Which was odd, because Marcus had told the trust's property manager that the building's electrical was outdated and would need replacement before any future commercial lease. If the panel had already been replaced, why hadn't the trust recorded it? I stood there and looked at the breakers. Most were off. But one, a 60 amp double pole, labeled in black marker, the writing half worn off, was on. I could read the first few letters. Clever. Climate. In an empty unit, in an unheated building, in April. I looked at the back wall. It was covered by a row of metal shelving units, floor to ceiling, heavy-duty commercial grade, the kind that holds several hundred kilograms. They were positioned flush against the wall and appeared bolted in place, but when I crouched down and looked at the base, I could see that only the outer 2 were actually anchored. The middle 4 were freestanding. They had just been pushed close enough to look fixed. I pulled on the end of the middle section. It moved. The whole run of shelving, 6 units wide, swung out from the wall on a central pivot like a door. Behind it was a second wall drywall, newer, painted a flat gray that matched the cement. You would not have seen the seam unless you were looking for it, and even then, only barely. I stood there for a long moment. Then I went to my car and got the tire iron from the emergency kit in the trunk. The drywall came apart in sections. It was not load-bearing, and it had been put up quickly. The joints barely mudded. Behind it was a room, a purpose-built storage room, roughly 12 feet deep and 20 feet wide, with a ceiling-mounted split unit running at low speed. That was the climate draw. Quiet. Steady. Efficient. Not the kind of system you put in a storage room unless what you're storing has very specific requirements. My flashlight caught the first one on the left wall. It was a flat storage crate, the kind used for oversized artwork, sealed and labeled with a condition report tag clipped to the corner. I looked at the tag. It had a gallery reference number, a title, and 2 initials, TT. I knew those initials. My father had worked for 30 years as a contracts manager for a mid-size commercial construction firm. He was not a collector, not a particularly artistic man, but he had done work for a private dealer in the 1990s. A favor for a favor, the kind of arrangement that generates paperwork that never quite makes it into official records. I pulled out my phone and searched the reference number from the tag. The result came back from a 2019 Christie's appraisal record. The item in question was a large-scale oil painting, Canadian artist, mid-20th century, condition rated excellent. The 2019 estimate was $180,000 to $240,000. I looked at the left wall. There were 14 crates on that wall alone. I looked at the right wall. There were shelving units with flat drawers, the kind used for prints and works on paper. I opened the first drawer carefully, a series of lithographs, each an archival interleaving, each with a condition tag. I opened the second drawer. More prints. Different artist. Same care. I walked to the back of the room. There was a wooden flat file cabinet pushed against the far wall, padlocked, with a small laminated card taped to the top that read, Estate of R. Calloway not for distribution. R. Calloway. Robert Calloway, my father-in-law. Ethan's father, who had died 4 years before I ever met Ethan, whose estate Marcus had managed, whose assets had been absorbed into the family trust in a settlement that Ethan described as pretty standard. I stood in that room for a long time. Then I locked the door, replaced the shelving, and drove back to Ottawa. I did not call Ethan. I did not call a lawyer. I called Claire. Claire had been my closest friend since university which made her the only person in my life who had known me before I was a Calloway. She was also, by profession, a senior associate at a firm specializing in estate litigation, which is the kind of coincidence that either means nothing or means everything, depending on what you're standing in when it comes up. I pulled into a Tim Hortons parking lot on the edge of Gloucester and called her. She picked up on the second ring. I need your read on something, I said, hypothetically. You've never called me for a hypothetical in your life, she said. Give me 10 minutes. I'm finishing a brief. I waited. I watched a family come out of the coffee shop. A father in a winter coat carrying 2 cups. A kid in rubber boots jumping in a puddle that had no business still existing in April. Normal. Everything completely normal outside this car window. Claire called back in 8 minutes. I told her what I had found. I was methodical about it. Dates, reference numbers, the condition of the drywall, the panel upgrade, the climate unit. I read her the tag information. I told her about Robert Calloway's name on the flat file cabinet. There was a silence. Where are you right now? She asked. Gloucester. Parking lot. Don't go home yet. I need to make 2 calls. Don't touch anything in that room again until I tell you to, and don't say anything to Ethan. He'll ask where I've been. Tell him the truth. You went to the property to check on things before the sale. That is the truth. She paused. Listen to me. If what you're describing is accurate, those items were potentially never properly disclosed in Robert Calloway's estate. That means the trust may have been structured around incomplete information. Which means the trust itself may be challengeable. The word landed somewhere in my chest. Challengeable. How long would this take? I asked. To challenge properly? Months. To secure interim protection for the assets, so Marcus can't liquidate them before a challenge is filed? I can have an application before a judge by Thursday. I let out a breath I had been holding since I walked into that back room. Do it, I said. The next 4 days were the strangest of my life. I went home that afternoon and made dinner, and sat across the table from Ethan and Marcus and Diane, and said almost nothing, which they attributed to being tired after a long drive. I watched Marcus cut his chicken with the confident precision of a man who has never once questioned his own version of events. I watched Diane refill her wine glass and describe a renovation she was planning for the sunroom. I watched Ethan look at his brother, the way he always looked at him with a kind of ambient gratitude, like Marcus's presence in the room was itself a form of shelter. I cleared the dishes and said I had a headache and went to bed at 9. On Wednesday, Claire called to tell me she had located the original estate file for Robert Calloway. There were 17 pieces of significant art listed in a personal inventory document that had never been entered into the formal estate proceedings. The inventory had been prepared by an art consultant in 2008, the year before Robert died, and had been signed by Robert himself. The document had been filed incorrectly with a batch of personal correspondence that Marcus had declared to the estate lawyer as miscellaneous papers, no financial value. Miscellaneous papers. 17 pieces. Several of them by artists whose market value had increased substantially in the 15 years since Robert's death. Claire had contacted a colleague at a Toronto auction house. The conservative estimate for the collection, based on the 2019 Christie's appraisal alone, was $1.1 million. The current market estimate, given the trajectory of several of the artists, was closer to $1.8 million. On Thursday morning, Claire's application was filed. An interim injunction was granted by late afternoon, freezing the sale of the Brockville property pending a full estate review. On Thursday evening, Marcus's phone rang during dinner. I watched his face change. I want to describe that moment carefully, because the people who asked me about it later, and many people asked, wanted it to be dramatic. They wanted the confrontation at the table, the voice raised, the accusation delivered across the breadth of a family dinner with appropriate cinematic weight. It was not like that. It was quieter. Which was worse, somehow. He stepped away from the table to take the call. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, he sat down and put his phone face down and picked up his fork and did not look at me for a long time. Then he did. Just briefly. And in that look was the realization I could see the exact moment it arrived that I had been in that back room, that I had found the cabinet, that I knew what was in it. He smiled. A different smile than the usual one. Thinner. Everything okay? Ethan asked. Fine, Marcus said. Work thing. He picked up his wine glass. How's the chicken? Diane said the chicken was lovely. I ate my dinner and said nothing. I did not sleep that night. Not from anxiety. I was past anxiety by then. I lay in the dark and thought about my father sitting in his hospital bed, telling me that the Calloway family collected people, and I thought about the fact that he had given me those keys years before I ever needed them, in a small envelope with my name on it, as if he had known or hoped that one day I would find a reason to use them. He had not told me what was in the building, but he had made sure I could get in. The estate review took 4 months. During that time, Marcus's lawyer sent 3 letters arguing that the art inventory had been an oversight, a filing error, a miscommunication between his father's estate and the legal team. Claire responded to each one, with the patience of someone who has been doing this for a long time, and knows that patience is itself a form of pressure. Ethan and I moved out of the house in month 2. We rented a small place in Centertown, a second-floor apartment, with drafty windows and a radiator that clanked at 3 in the morning, and a view of a parking garage that I found oddly comforting in its predictability. We did not talk about Marcus much. We talked about other things, what to cook for dinner, whether the radiator could be fixed, what we wanted the next few years to look like. Some of those conversations were good, some of them were hard. I will not say what came of them, because that part is private, and still unfinished, and belongs only to us. What I will say is this: there are some people you love because they are easy to love, and there are some people you love in spite of how hard it is, and sometimes the difference between those two things teaches you something essential about your own character. I learned some things about mine during those months that I am not entirely comfortable with, and also would not trade. The estate review concluded in August. The court found that the 17 artworks had been improperly excluded from Robert Calloway's estate, and should have been distributed according to the estate's terms, which provided for equal division between Marcus and Ethan. The trust, having been structured around an incomplete asset disclosure, was amended. The Brockville property sale was cancelled. The building's full value was reassessed with the corrected electrical records in place, and a new commercial lease was signed with a regional logistics company at a rate that, on an annual basis, is significantly better than what Marcus had accepted before. Marcus paid his brother's legal costs. This was not a settlement. It was an order. Diane did not speak to me at the review. She looked through me, the way you look through someone, when you have decided that acknowledging them directly is beneath you. I found, to my surprise, that I did not mind. The art was moved to a registered storage facility in Ottawa, and is in the process of being properly catalogued. Several pieces will go to auction this fall, 2 of them a large oil, and a series of 4 prints. Ethan and I have decided to keep. We have not yet decided where to hang them, because we do not yet know where we will be living when this is all finished. But we have the walls, and we have time, and for the first time in a long time, both of those things feel like ours. I have thought, since all of this, about the moment I opened that electrical panel. Not about what I found. About the moment before I found it, when I was standing in an empty room in a building that was about to be sold, looking for problems in a checklist, doing exactly what I had been doing in that family for 3 years. Looking for inefficiencies. Looking for leaks. The difference was that this time, the leak led somewhere. My father was a contracts manager. He spent his career reading documents that other people signed without reading, and his greatest fear, the one he tried, imperfectly, to pass on to me was that generosity could be engineered into a liability, that the willingness to trust was, in the wrong hands, an exposure. He was right. He was right in a way that cost me years and cost me a marriage I am still deciding the shape of, and cost me the particular innocence of believing that family, as a word, means something consistent regardless of who is using it. But he also left me the keys. And somewhere in that gesture, that small, quiet, a deliberate act of handing his daughter a set of keys to a property that turned out to contain the evidence she would one day need, I choose to believe he was also right about something else. That the same quality that makes you collectible, your willingness to show up, to pay the bill, to do the unglamorous work without demanding recognition, is also the quality that finds things other people miss, because they were too arrogant to look, because they assumed the building was empty, because they sent you there thinking it was punishment. And you walked in with your flashlight and your checklist, and you found exactly what you needed.